Hello, we are Group 25 and our topic is post-disaster construction. My name is Thomas.
My name is Sky.
And I am Tucker.
Throughout this presentation, we will discuss definitions, trends, and issues, as well as a case study relating to construction after a disastrous event. In most cases, a disaster is caused by weather conditions, including hurricanes, tornadoes, floods, earthquakes, volcanoes, and wildfires. These natural disasters have a huge impact on the triple bottom line. Socially, housing is destroyed, water and power supplies are cut off, and disease spreads. Environmentally, water contamination and agricultural destruction can occur. Economically, recovery and rebuilding are expensive. Overall, damages add up and cause issues for many parts of society. When considering post-disaster construction, a different timeline must take place compared to regular construction. Normally, a week is dedicated to rescue, and 3 months is dedicated to relief. The goal is to save as many lives as possible, and then provide safe spaces for people to go. Rehabilitation usually occurs for 5 years following the disaster. A disaster also changes the typical construction process. The scope of the work changes. Ownership and funding for reconstruction causes issues regarding who's responsible. There is more risk and more difficulties in management as the timeline is greatly shortened. Labor resources, mobilization, and logistics all prove to be problems as well. When it comes to post-disaster construction, there are 2 time frame categories, short-term and long-term. Short-term construction starts as soon as the rescue phase is complete. The focus here is to reestablish lifelines like shelters, water supplies, and electricity, as well as clearing debris. Long-term construction occurs throughout the disaster and after. The focus here is reconstructing buildings and adding features to prevent harm caused by similar future disasters.
Climate change has been worsening, which increased the frequency of natural disasters, meaning that the construction industry has to adapt faster. This calls for more efficient construction methods and more construction in general. Following disasters, there's a lot of demand for the construction industry as extra construction is needed to rebuild after every single disaster. City planners and construction analysts have seen the trend of more frequent natural disasters and are becoming better equipped to handle them. There's been a push to prepare for disaster before it strikes. For example, barriers are installed along rivers known to cause flooding. These measures are used to prevent citizens from fleeing after a disaster. Another way to prevent this is to have the ability to rebuild quickly, meaning growth in the construction industry. Following natural disasters, the construction industry faces many issues. These include determining the scope of work, funding, and how quickly decisions are made. To determine the scope of work, time, money, and available resources must all be considered, all of which are limited after a disaster. When it comes to funding, it is difficult to know who is responsible. Funding often comes from the government, but it's difficult to determine whether the city, state, or federal government should cover the cost of reconstruction. It's also difficult to find contractors to work at reasonable prices with so much risk. These issues all tie into the rapidity of decision-making because temporary fixes only last so long. After disaster, there's little time to plan before people start to demand permanent housing or worse, move away altogether. There are also many challenges when it comes to planning the actual reconstruction projects. There's a lot of uncertainty in how many people will plan on returning after rebuilding, which makes it hard to plan on who to rebuild for. These disasters can also push for better preparation for the future. However, this presents a challenge because more money and resources are required for redesign than rebuilding. Usually, because of the limited budget and tight schedule, even rebuilding is difficult and the quality of work tends to be low.
Some key points to post-disaster reconstruction include safety, quality, time, and money. Buildings and infrastructure must be designed better and safer for future generations. In time crunches, worker safety can be compromised, so it is important to remember safety must come first. Under short-term time spans, on top of limited resources, quality also tends to be compromised. Therefore, construction should be done as quickly as possible while maintaining safety and quality. Lastly, it is difficult to find adequate public and private funding for immediate reconstruction. There are many stakeholders involved throughout the entire reconstruction and post-disaster process. These include households, community members, local businesses, local, state, and federal governments, and commercial and construction industries. Consider the recent disaster in Puerto Rico in 2017. Two hurricanes, Irma and Maria, hit Puerto Rico just days apart. This resulted in tremendous damages, including 2,975 deaths and knocked out utility services. There was a total of $139 billion in damages, and 135,000 people have fled the island since. The relief efforts from the federal government were slow and minimal, making recovery very difficult. After the hurricanes, the Puerto Rican government established these 3 steps. Shelter was first. They needed to reconstruct temporary housing, and a lot of the time is using blue tarps to repair roofs. Next was to restore power to the island, which was difficult to do since the infrastructure was old already. And finally, sustainable housing and energy for the future was considered to prepare for future disasters. Thank you very much for listening to our presentation.